Thank you.
So, Nuruddin, why do you write? I mean, what? Why do this? Why?
Why do I write? I haven't quite asked myself the question, but sometimes when I ask myself the question, why do I write, I give different answers depending on who asks them. One of the things I've been saying lately, because I continue producing books, is to say that there are 24 hours in a day, too many hours to kill, too little else to do, and the best thing is to continue scribbling until the scribble, one scribbling makes sense. Of course, I have also been trained as a literary person, and I could give you all kinds of spiel about the wisdom of, learning about myself, teaching people about my country, Somalia, which nobody knows anything correctly. I could give you 100 number of reasons, but why did you ask?
Well, it's well, as somebody afflicted by the same disease, it's always nice to kind of know. I mean, two reasons. One was, it's been costly. It's an expensive thing.
You mean
to
on
do.
me?
But I'm interested too in the idea of how you wanted to go into the imaginative world. You talk about being trained, training. What was the idea of the writing? Where did it first start?
Well, it started as first of all, I usually say I started it when at the age of 4, my mother, who was pregnant with the sister who came after me, couldn't cope with me. And one way of dealing with that difficulty was to send me off to the Quranic school. And then, so that I would be taught something that she couldn't teach me. And I recall what happened because I was caned on my first day at the Quranic school. I think I fell in love with the idea of writing because you could take the whole day and copy in one sentence without understanding, because this was in Arabic. I had no understanding of Arabic. And I was fascinated, with the idea of giving shape to sounds that I made. And then subsequently, when I reached the age of about 8 or 9, by which time I had Somali, Amharic, which is the official Ethiopian language, Arabic, and English, I started a little writing business, letter writing business. And the idea for the letter writing business was for me to write letters for some of the adults who were illiterate.
Yeah.
And I used to charge them a fee at the age of about 9, because my father didn't give us enough pocket money. And my business was doing extremely well.
I can imagine.
Until one day, a man came to me and he told me a story about a rebel wife, his, who had gone off because I was living in Calafo, who had gone off to Beledweyne, from where her family came, and she wouldn't come back. So he asked me to write a letter on his behalf. And the content of the letter was so horrifying that I had to change it, because he said to me, tell this person, his wife, that if she did not come back in 30 days, he was going to go to Beledweyne, beat her up, break every single bone of hers, drag her all the way to Calafo, and then beat her some more. Now, at the age of about 9, there was very little I could do other than use the power that I had. And therefore, what I did was I changed, instead of being truthful to what he told me, I said in the letter, which I was writing in Arabic, that if you do not come back in 30 days, you may consider yourself divorced.
How old were you then?
About 9. Chronologically.
Yes.
And then the letter went, he paid me, the letter was delivered, the woman waited for 2, 3, 4 weeks, and then she took it to the Qadi, to the judge in the town, who declared her divorced. The husband went to Beledweyne, discovered his wife married to somebody else, upon which he raised a storm, and then he was shown the letter that I wrote. And because it was written in what you would consider standard Arabic, which the Qadi understood and, in inverted commas, respected, the divorce stood. So the man came back to Calafo, the town in which we lived, and went straight to my father, who then, my father couldn't do anything other than say, well, we'll find another wife for you. And my father instructed me that I should never, ever again write anything for anyone else. Now, it may have, the sound of a mischievous 9-year-old boy doing this, but I think there was something that I think had worked in my thinking, that no one had the right to beat up somebody, break their bones, and drag them all the way from Beledweyne to Calafo, across a border, you see. That's, I don't know how they would have negotiated the Ethiopian-Somali border. But in any case, the point is that something, I don't know whether it's something to do with luck, something to do with foresight, something to do with the fact that I had known women being terribly beaten up by their husbands, and that the one thing I could do was to do my little bit, and the little bit was to make her divorced. And then the writing, therefore, that wasn't a writing as such. The writing would come a bit later, but because this time I'm what you call jobless, because my letter business had been closed down, and pocket money is short. And then my mother was a community poet. She was she used to, in Somali we would call her Farah. In other words, she would compose the occasional poem for an occasional, for a wedding or a festivity. And my mother used to compose poems for people who were getting married, and if, either a relative or a friend with son or daughter was getting married, she would be asked to compose a poem in praise of either the bride or the bridegroom. And then my mother would, one day, one of my brothers or sisters, I forget which, was sick, and then my mother asked me. The genre of poetry, Somali female poetry, is called burambur. So she used to compose burambur poems, and so she asked me, could I deliver a burambur, a few lines of a burambur in which she was praising someone, to so-and-so who is at the wedding. And the tradition in Somalia at that time was the mother of a household would be invited, and if she came to work in the kitchen or to help in any form, the person would receive a present in kind. In other words, you would get meat rather than cash.
For composing the poem?
For composing the poem, or for coming to help in the kitchen, or for doing something.
Yes.
So I remember once my mother asked me to go and deliver a poem, which I faithfully did. And on my way back, playing with a soccer, and carrying the meat, raw meat, holding it up, a hawk came. And took it off.
Yes.
Took off with it. And I recall being terribly disturbed. So the next time my mother asked me, and then she said to me, what happened to the meat? And I said, the hawk took it. So I was given a bit of a tongue. Afterwards, the only thing I would accept would be to deliver the burambur if she needed it. And then next time I was asked to deliver the burambur, what I did was I rewrote some of the lines. I changed the text.
Also, it's her who would write it, and you would deliver her...
No, Somalia had no orthography at that time.
Yes.
She would recite it to me. I would learn it by heart, walk 2.5 kilometers sometimes, playing soccer at the time as you were going home. And then naturally you may misplace or mislay a line or two. And so when I couldn't remember the lines, I made up the lines. And in Somali, the good thing about Somali poetry is that it's alliterative. So if you can find the balance and the scansionable alliteration, you're okay. So
if you keep up the rhythm of the alliteration.
Yes. And so because I did that, the people received it, accepted it, wanted to give me some meat. So I said no more meat because there is a hawk waiting for me. And then when my mother came and she heard the woman singing the burambur, my mother said, this is not what I sent my son. And so again, I was told never ever again to change lines.
So you are not to write any more letters, and you're not to anymore deliver them or mess with them?
Deliver them, because she couldn't trust me anymore. She couldn't trust me anymore, because in Somali there are words that have dual meanings, and I used one of the words that had dual meanings. And so the groom became a weaker person than she had intended it to be. So there was a point of crisis, and the woman had to relearn the poem, the burambur.
Yes.
So anyway, the thing continued in that way until about 11 years of age. I started changing the text. This time, I didn't want to deal with any living being. because I learned a lesson from the woman who was beaten to near death. I learned a lesson from changing the text from my mum's. And the problem now was, how can you continue experimenting with texts and poems without incurring someone's anger? And that is when I started changing the textbooks that we used to use. And the textbooks that we used to use had stories in which there were, in school in Ethiopia, we used to use the same textbooks as the East African, and Mr. Kazi used to be a character in one of those books, and so on and so forth. So the idea was, in fact, to see how much text we could use. And at the age of 16, I took a text by Ernest Hemingway,
Yeah.
and I rewrote it because I thought he was wrong, grammatically.
Okay, now you've got to go into detail. Okay, yes. You okay.
I rewrote the text,
Yeah.
and the reason is because I thought that Hemingway got it wrong, the way he wrote it. And my American teacher, who was teaching me at high school, thought it was quite arrogant of me, a small little African child, for whom English is his fourth language, to be changing the text of America's Nobel Prize winner. So I was kicked out of school.
Yes.
All these things prepared me for what I would write later, and the fact that Siad Barre and I would run into trouble with each other. All these things also taught me that there is more truth in writing than there is in speaking. Because there is, in writing, one thinks much more succinctly and much more seriously. Ask any writer or a journalist or anyone who deals with words. Words make sense when you give them that shape. And all these years, therefore, that I have been fooling around with other people's texts or other people's stories or other people's lives was in preparation for the day when I would face an empty piece of paper and write.
You talked about shape. I really like that the idea of when doing in the Quranic school, you said giving the words shape. You came back again to the idea of shaping, keeping. I thought that.
Well, you see, I think I am a professional writer, and I spend about, on a daily basis, when I'm not in Nairobi or somewhere else traveling, I spend from 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 either writing or thinking about writing. Now, when I'm not writing, and I'm not even thinking about writing, I'm thinking about shaping the world that I know into, and molding it into a shape with which I can deal. Narratives are given shape not through writing, but through rewriting, through giving them the shape.
I'm curious to know what you write fiction, and you write fiction about Somalia, but you write fiction that's of the world in so many ways. What's fictional Somalia to you, I guess? What is the idea of Somalia to you? What's the drive? Is it the departure? Is it leaving? Is it being? Is it the problems it's had? Is it missing it? Is it missing what it could be?
No, I don't miss Somalia in the way that many people talk about missing a country.
Yes.
And the reason is the Somalia that I bring into the imagination and bring forth into the world is more orderly, less chaotic, more truthful, because with all respect, I would say the majority of Somalis have started believing their own lies. And when a people have started believing their own lies, they're in trouble forever. Now, there is only truth in fiction. And the only truth is in fiction. Now, I could say the same thing about Kenya, fearing, of course, that I'd be told to leave tomorrow, and I want to leave day after tomorrow. I want to leave day after tomorrow, but I would be forced to leave tomorrow if I said some of the things I can say about Kenya today. So to make sure that I don't get thrown out, I would stick with Somalia. Somalis...
Yes.
Now, the only novel that I wrote in Somalia, the one called A Naked Needle, is the least Somali of all my novels. It is the most, in inverted commas, it's a plain literary game. I took a chapter from James Joyce's Ulysses and turned it into a novel. And it's a story that takes place one day in the life of the city of Mogadishu. I wrote it in 1974. Now, because I was not allowed, or I shouldn't say, I should be careful here, because I did not allow myself to return to Somalia and face the consequences of what might have been, I was promised 30 years in prison, but 30 years in prison when you're only 26, 27 is a long time in prison.
A long time in prison for anybody, at any time.
Especially for writing a very silly novel, when you think of it. So, the world that the Somalis live in, most of the time, is a world also in which Somalis reimagine the world continuously and tell themselves things that do not really exist in reality. They do not exist in reality. They tell themselves. I mean, can you imagine can you imagine a country organized along the lines of some clan story? This particular person belongs to this one, that particular person belongs to that clan family, and therefore the ministry should go to this one, the department should go. I can't vouch for the fact that I am my father's son. How could I accept, that I belong to that particular group or something like that? So, Somalia is a very disturbing country when you think of it. As
is Kenya, yeah.
As is Kenya. You can say that, I can't.
I've just said it. But you can't say it.
So it's actually telling the story, not what people say, but what people don't say, that goes into novels.
What then was your relationship to English and writing, eventually, writing fiction, and why was it a silly novel?
Or the novel, The Naked Needle.
Yeah.
Well, my relationship to English is a very complex one in that it's my fourth language. I could not have written in Somali because Somali had no orthography. I did not want to write in Amharic because as a child growing up in Ethiopia, and a Somali child growing up in Ethiopia, we had been trained to believe this was enemy language. On top of this, because Amharic has something in the region of 300 something letters of the alphabet, a typewriter, true to the script, would be like a huge piano, which I couldn't reach. I was too small, too short, and I couldn't reach. And they hadn't invented a typewriter at that time when I started writing. I could have written in Arabic and did, in fact, write a couple of stories in Arabic. But the difficulty again was a typewriter. I started writing in Italian. Again, a typewriter difficulty, because Olivetti, the Italian typewriter called Olivetti, which I had, continued breaking. And there were certain letters of the alphabet that always got stuck. And then I found an America-made typewriter called Royal, which was quite sturdy, strong, did not break. You could write faster and faster. And then I said, well, this is the language in which I'm going to write. And that's why I chose to write in English.
It's excellent. And you're in Somalia then? You hadn't gone off to India to study?
No, I was in Somalia because I was working in the Ministry of Education as a clerk typist. And because I had paper and a typewriter that belonged to the government, I used the typewriter, and my boss, a lady, God bless her now, she's dead, called Sirad Yusuf, who was my boss, came to me one day, and when she discovered that I was writing something, she stopped me, and she said, you work for government, you don't write, you don't use government typewriters. And because I had been hired as a clerk typist, and not as the person who wrote the letters in English, Italian, and Arabic. I wrote all the letters. She didn't speak English. She didn't speak Arabic. And although I was the clerk, I was writing it, and then I went on strike. So the office stopped working.
I remember the late Chinua Achebe, I used to go to his house and we'd chat, and he said this thing once that just suddenly out of the blue, he was like, it's like you woke up one day and everything was gone. He said, and everybody was gone or turned. And it seemed as if, in some places in the late 60s, but in the late 70s, all of a sudden, there are dictatorships, there's people moving from one place to another, people are going into exile, dreams are broken over certain ideas. And sitting from here or from 5 years ago, it always seemed, it seemed already put into the past somehow. And I feel now, thinking back to those times, which I was, 5 or 6 years old, that things are coming. I don't know how best else to put it, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about how so many writers of your generation, African writers of your generation, ended up saying, I just wanted to, write my stories and so on. Then now, what happened now where you're in trouble with Barre? How did this start to come to be? It couldn't have been willed,
Well, it all depends on what the writer wants to do. The trouble started not with Siad Barre, for me. The trouble first started when I published my first novel, From a Crooked Rib, in which a number of people came to me, Somalis, and they said to me that I was washing our dirty linen in public. And if you truly ask them, what dirt was I exposing? You would hear it in the answer given by Siad Barre once. Siad Barre was once asked by a German diplomat who was in Mogadishu. She said to him, "What is it with you and Nuruddin Farah?" And he said he's always saying that women should be given more positions than they have, that we should treat our women better. And then she, being a woman and an ambassador, she said, "What's wrong with that?" And he said, "Well, the world would come to an end." So if somebody thinks like that, you know, for somebody who is interested in the general equality, not only the equality in its specifics, but also in its generality, because I think that we in Africa, we in Somalia, would do far better, far, far better, if we gave each individual the respect that's due to them. The wife, the respect that's due to her. The children, the love and adoration that's due to them. Not ask the child, every child, most Somali parents that I knew, not the ones who sit in here, they're good, all of them, but the ones that I knew, if they found their child doing anything, they would be punished for doing nothing. There is no communication, adoration between parents and children. There has to be harmony in the family unit, within the family unit, for there to be progress in society, for there to be development, for there to be, and we're not really way back. If you look at it in terms of the progress the rest of the world have made, we're not far behind when you think that all this so-called democracy, all this liberation, all this independence is only 20, 30 years old at most. You know, there's very little difference. There was a very little difference between England and many places in Africa in the 60s. I lived in England, and I know what I'm talking about. There was very little difference. However, the more doors you open for people to have opportunity, for more people to be respected on an individual basis, the more adoration exists within the members of the family, within the members of the community. This continuous xenophobia everywhere. You know, I live in Cape Town, South Africa. It's very xenophobic. I come to Kenya, Nairobi. It's xenophobic, you know. There is plenty. There is enough for all of us. But we must respect the individual for what the individual is, and not respect where they come from. You know, where people would say, we must ennoble the person, the individual, and the liberties they make, the democracy that, you know, that they must enjoy. We're not doing that. Why? Because our traditions do not have enough room for change. We can change our trousers, we can change the clothes that we wear. We may have the most sophisticated iPod, iPhone, I this and I that. But we haven't progressed in the last 200-300 years. We're still where we were 200 years ago. And I'm saying, well, let's wake up. The rest of the world has woken up. Let's wake up. Feminism is a contemporary thing for some of us. 1974, if you were in New York or in London or in Zurich, you heard the same stories. What happened to us? Where were we when they were doing this? Where were we? The conflicts that are taking place in Africa now, many of the conflicts, should have taken place 200 years ago. You know, we should have sorted out these ethnic differences. We should have known how to coexist, how to live together, how to, but we haven't done it. We haven't done it, and the reason is because somebody says female circumcision is a cultural thing and we cannot change cultural thing. But you have changed cultural thing by taking iPhone, by doing all this. So why can't you change some of the other things? Why can't you, for example, change the fact that in this day and age, for there to be tension in Kenya, I'm leaving day after tomorrow, in Kenya about the question of ethnicity, because somebody won or lost, and therefore everything is seen through that prism, and in the 21st century, when the country has been independent for 60 years. Is it 60 or less? I don't know. I can't. 50. Yeah, there's a difference of 10.
Our troops, Kenyan troops, fought in Somalia and are still in Somalia substantively. And
You remember your troops are still in East Lee too.
Yes, very much so. Yes.
You bring armed groups every time there are Somalis, everywhere there are Somalis.
Yes. So this is the direction I'm trying to head to. Where do we go forward as Kenya and Somalia? What's
Well, I haven't seen them in action.
Yes.
And because I haven't seen them in action, if you believe the reports that you read in the Kenyan press, or in the 100 and so Somali websites, you wouldn't know what to believe. But I would equally be interested in taking you to Slee, in the harassment of ordinary folks, in the not acknowledgement of the fact that Somalis have a primary stake in this country as Kenyans, in the declaration that Somalis were seen as second-class citizens, in the massacres of Somalis that have never been acknowledged, accounted for. But I wouldn't actually confine it to only that. Kenya needs, humanity needs to revisit, not only Kenya, but many, many different countries. With regard to the armed African presence, the AMISOM, there is my hobby horse, which I always like to ride. And that is that erroneously, because of what happened in 1963 at the OAU, when Somalia was singularly isolated, because Somalia had challenged the colonial mapping of Africa, and almost all African countries, with no exception, insisted that the colonial boundaries must remain. They were sacrosanct. After this particular event, Somalia turned its back on Africa and looked in the direction of the Middle East and the Gulf Arabs. Now, that would have its consequences later. And the reason is because by turning its back on Africa and by focusing and therefore developing a flourishing relationship with the Arab countries, and also by joining the Arab League, because Somalia felt isolated in the continent, that would visit, that tragic choice would revisit Somalia through Shabab. In the same way as the attempt on the part of Kenya, Ethiopia, and the rest of Africa, attempting to isolate Somalia politically, meant that Kenya benefited a great deal from the Somali chaos. But if you, they say, if you send your dog out and it bites someone, the responsibility comes back to you in one form or the other. Because the rest of Africa paid no attention to Somalia. Somalia collapsed, and all these years, not one single Arab country has made the slightest offer to help. And now it has fallen to the rest of Africa to come and help Somalia to be put together again. Whether this will be worth it, we do not know, but I sleep at night optimistically and wake up in the mornings pessimistically. So, depending on when you meet me.
Let me ask a quick question. If the Kenyans here have been to school and in the 844 system, do you at any point study anything about Somalia in Kenya? You do? In which class? Form? You do, yes? Huh? Oh, okay.
I can
just
tell you,
because in school we never did.
That is true, and I can tell you something.
I did history up to A levels, and there wasn't a thing called
exactly.
Somalia.
But I can tell you an incident that involved me directly. There was a poor sot who was asked to do her masters. A young woman was asked to do her masters on Farah. So she wrote to me a questionnaire consisting of 150 questions. The first question, what languages do you speak in Somalia? Was the first question. Second question, what is the religion in Somalia? Now you could tell that this person really and truly had no idea. But, the other thing is, of course, in truth, Somalis know a lot about Kenya. Somalis know a lot entrepreneurially about all these countries. Kenyans know nothing about Somalia. Ethiopians know hardly anything about Somalia. Somalia becomes a mystery country. And because it's become a mystery country, everybody, especially European anthropologists and Americans, invent stories that do not exist. The latest invention is there are pirates in Somalia. There are no pirates in Somalia. I can tell you the truth. I was there. And I can tell you there are no pirates in Somalia. And yet, everybody believes what other people say about Somalia. And the reason is because we Somalis do not speak in one voice. We do not speak in one voice.
I'd like to know a little bit more about the myth of the pirates in Somalia.
Well, read Crossbones, and you will discover there are no pirates in Somalia. You can call them something else, but they're not pirates, I can tell you. And there is no money there, so you don't go to Puntland to discover money, coming from the pirate. Whenever you see a huge basket said to be full of money, CNN would show you a huge basket hanging down, and they tell you in that basket there is $3 million. CNN tells you. Don't believe it. Because I was there, the bag was empty.
So let's. Kwan is bringing out Crossbones later this year, hopefully. I'd like to talk a little bit about that. I haven't read it. I didn't get my.
I haven't read it either.
Yes. But I want to talk a little bit about about Crossbones and a little bit about what's coming. What are you working on for next?
I have just finished a novel.
Frame for us, yes.
I've just finished a novel, sent it off about 3 weeks ago. If you see me traveling, it means I've either finished something or I'm not yet, I haven't yet started on something new. I've just finished a novel about sexuality.
Oh, yes.
I once wrote a novel about, parts of it about sexuality. And all my Somali friends said, Nuruddin, you could have done better than this. So probably this time, some of my friends won't talk to me for a decade.
Excellent. So that's the coming one.
That's a coming one. I submitted it, as I said, 3 weeks ago.
Great. And Crossbones.
What about you?
What about it? I mean,
Crossbones, first of all, you have to understand, Crossbones is the third part of a trilogy, which began with links, continued in knots,
yes.
and ends. And therefore it would make logic, if I were to speak, it would make logic to understand the different aspects of the three. Because I write trilogies. I'm long-winded, and I write trilogies. And now I've started on a new trilogy. So the trilogy is about the different stages that the Somali civil war has taken, the different routes and perspectives of the Somali trilogy, of the Somali, civil war. The first one, between 1991 and 1996, that's when links takes place. And that's when, Somalis were made to understand that what was happening in Somalia was something called clan conflict. I have never bought into that. What was happening in Somalia at that time, at the early stages of the Somali civil war, was a few people wanting to take over power, replace Siad Barre, wearing the garb of the clan family from which they came, as to be recruited, to recruit young, unemployable, ill-educated youths. We were made to understand this was a clan conflict. And I remember sitting once in Mogadishu in 1996, and a very well-known French anthropologist who was sitting in the room with me, who was staying in the same hotel as I was staying in 1996, came running, and then he said, Clan X has taken such a street. He mentioned the name of a street in Holwadak, Mogadishu. And so I said, Clan what? And he said, and this is the man who teaches at the Sorbonne, and he teaches, Somali history at the Sorbonne. So I said to him, it can't be. And he said, it is. And I said to him, that particular clan is a large clan. And they would number something in the region of 250,000 to 500,000. Are you telling me that in this particular district of Holwadak, 500,000 of that particular clan have come and have taken it? And he said, no, I'm not saying that. I said, what are you saying? He said, this particular clan has taken it. I said, no. You could say 5 people who may have belonged to this particular clan family has taken it. And then you must name the people, since you are actually pointing at their criminality. That the nature of such generalization has created a lot of misunderstanding, to the extent where ordinary people in Mogadishu who belong to other, if you belong to Clan X and someone, of your clan killed somebody else, the story would be you would be killed. This didn't happen. There were many, many Somalis who were saved by lots and lots of other people. More people have been saved than have been killed in the Somali civil war. There were limits. It's not like Shabab today. There were limits. Somalis have intermarried one another. And regardless of how you look at it, regardless of what Somalis say, you always ask them, whenever you hear of a conflict, if there is a Somali who comes and says to you, this person, ask more specific questions, and you would actually discover is that the grievance has no grounds. The statement that's being made does not justify the grievance that's being aired. I'm quite sure the same is true here too.
Yes.